So I'd like to open this talk by a poem by Denise Levertov entitled What Goes Unsaid. In each mind, even the most candid, there are forests where needled haze overshadows the slippery duff and patches of snow long frozen, or elsewhere mangroves proliferate, vine and twisted, loom over warm water that slowly bubbles. In these forests there live certain events, shards of memory, scraps of once heard lore, intimations once familiar, some painful, some shameful, some drably or laughably inconsequent, other thoughts that the thinker could never hold fast and begin to tell, and some, a few, that are noble, tender, and so complete in themselves, they had no need of saying. There they dwell, no sky above them, resting like dragonflies on the dense air or nested on inaccessible twigs. It is right that there are these secrets. Even the weightless ones have perhaps some part to play in the unperceivable whole. And these forests, privacies in the deep terrain to receive them. Right that they rise at times into our ken and are acknowledged. And that's kind of what this talk is about. I find that psychedelic experiences oftentimes dig up what is left unsaid, what is deep in the forests, under the shadows of trees, that people find themselves finally able to bring to the surface and give voice to. And so how do we support people in exploring those parts of themselves that come up during these psychedelic experiences? And so my first slide here, I want to name, I like to do this, sort of name my social location. I want people to know where I'm coming from, what influences me, not just my experiences, but also my identities in these spaces. I'm a white, queer, femme, able-bodied, neurotypical person. And I grew up in the Woodlands, Texas, which is on the unceded territory of the Coeultecan, the Akokisa, and the Alabama Coushatta tribes that currently live there today. I am currently based in Lemoyne, Maine, which is right outside of Ellsworth, on the unceded land of the Wabanaki. And primarily I come from a background in academia. I have a BS in molecular biology. For much of my life, the early half of my life, I was enthralled with primate evolutionary genetics. And then I changed the course of my life. And where at once I deified science and rational thought, I very unexpectedly took a turn towards the spiritual and became ordained in 2022 as an interfaith chaplain from the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine. That was a 2-year program. And in 2021, I started volunteering for the Fireside Project, which is a psychedelic peer support line. I still do that today. And somewhere in between, I did training for nonviolent communication. I did a program through Seek Healing called Listening Training. This is a program that works specifically with people who are bonded to certain substances and trying to create models of community care. And then have also completed a grief ritual leadership training through the lineage of Francis Weller, and several psychedelic coaching integration courses with TAN. And then also highly influential is that I've been a teacher for 15 years, mostly working with 16 and 17-year-olds. So that is a trip unto itself. And as I sort of envisioned this talk, I think I went a little bit too broad. I was like, I want to talk about how to, help support people as they're processing trips, but I also want to talk about holding space for people as they're undergoing trips. But as I created this talk, I realized I was really just interested in the integration portion. So, forewarning, that's kind of what this is focused on. And I kind of want to get on the same page about integration because it's a word that is used a lot and sort of lost meaning. We just use it without actually putting definition to it. And some people might have definitions then from what I post here. But it's about creating this bridge between what people experience, or the content, or the insights gained during a psychedelic trip, and those of our ordinary consciousness, or our sort of consensus reality, right? How we go through our day in and day out. And just some of the core principles of how to help someone integrate that. I'm going to go through these kind of several times, so this is just a quick snippet here. But I also want to emphasize that this really isn't just about integration. I think these are key tools and skills to use with anyone in your life. I mean, life is one big psychedelic trip. Giving birth is a psychedelic trip. Getting married, getting divorced, losing loved ones. These are all very impactful, phenomenal experiences of transitions. And anytime we have that perspective shift, it is my hope that there's someone in your life who can provide these things for you to help you process and integrate these experiences. So part of what I'll be talking about today, this is kind of the core. It's just this idea of witness and witness. And some of you I know in the audience have maybe already heard this story, because I'm just picking something from a conversation I had on the psychedelic peer support line a couple weeks ago that kind of exemplifies this. But a few weeks ago I had a caller who had done about 1 gram of psilocybin mushrooms. And they'd done mushrooms before, they'd had a great experience on it, but they were feeling really uneasy and anxious during this 1 gram trip. And they just needed some distraction. So they called in to speak with a volunteer. I picked up the phone. And what they were really needing was distraction, to tell a story. I needed to tell a story to them, and I just couldn't. I couldn't pick out a story. And so I started to ask them about the room and where they were, and they described laying on the ground of their living room. And I said, okay, cool, what's the ground like down there? Is it wood? Is it carpet? And they described they were on wood and they were on this mottled gray rug. And I said, okay, is there a story with the rug? Tell me about this rug. And they let out this big sigh. Oh, my partner bought this rug. And then they went on to this sort of long love soliloquy to their partner, and just how much they appreciated their partner and loved them and felt so supported by them. And then they came to this realization, oh, I was supposed to call my partner before I called you. And I wanted to tell them that I was on mushrooms. But they don't know that I do mushrooms. And so I didn't because I was really scared. And through their own knowing and conclusion, they said, I realize what I need to do. I need to hang up the phone right now and call my partner and tell them that I'm doing mushrooms and that I'm scared and that they need to leave work early and come home right now. And I was like, okay, yes, good job. This is great. I'm so glad that you've come to this realization. Absolutely. Best of luck. Thanks for calling in. So glad that, you felt like you came to you got what you needed here. But on the inside, I was dying. I was just like, this is not a good idea. This person definitely should not call their partner and tell them that they're on mushrooms for the first time ever. And so this kind of highlights this idea of, when you are with someone and witnessing them, you don't have a goal in mind. You're not trying to fix anyone. You're not trying to direct them. You're just allowing them to be fully in their own agency and truth. And that allows you to just witness the full depth of their experience, the full range of their emotion, without applying judgment or trying to shift anything. And it's also incredibly hard internal work too, because there will be judgment that arises. There will be this desire to shift someone's direction. And the trick is just putting that aside and just trusting that whatever is unfolding is exactly what the person needs. to do for themselves. They did call back and said that their partner was exceptionally angry with them. So it didn't go well, but it was fine. So we'll be getting into some of these as well. And what I want to sort of do is outline sort of a step-by-step approach. I don't like formulas. I don't really like a step-by-step approach, but it seemed important to kind of lay out how to approach support with a couple of key things in mind. So this first one, which I think is really important, and I don't know if we discuss it enough, which is like choosing to support someone. This idea that it is a choice. It's not something that you just have to do. And when I'm talking about choosing to support someone, I'm really talking about in the lens of psychedelic peer support. Obviously, if you're a professional, this is totally different. But I'm talking about providing support to our community members, to our friends, to our families. And there's a lot more consent that happens here because it is a choice. And these are some questions that I ask myself, particularly going into like a fireside shift or really processing with anybody their psychedelic experience or major life experiences. It's like, do I have a desire to do this right now? And am I in a place of feeling compassionate and not needing? And what I mean by not needing is like not needing a certain outcome or not needing to be a certain thing to this person, like a savior or, inhabiting a certain role. Do I have awareness and presence, or am I feeling really distracted? Is there something on my mind that I need to tend to? Because and if I don't, then I won't be able to be present here. And then capacity and sobriety. These are major ones. So if there's anything here that is a no for you in the moment, learning how to offer a compassionate no, such as, wow, I really want to hear what happened to you during your 3.5 gram psilocybin trip, and I'm noticing that I'm feeling really maxed out right now. I've got a lot on my plate for work. I'm wondering if we can try to connect next week about this. These compassionate no's, right? To let the person know that you really care, but you are not in a current place where you feel like you can best support them. And this is hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me. I've had to learn how to do this over time and still don't always do this. Still don't have complete yeses to all of this. So it's a continual practice, but one that's worth practicing, particularly with people that you feel you have a lot of safety with and ability to say no to without repercussions. Get present. So this is kind of what we did when we walked in the room today. It's okay to ask for a little bit of space to get present, to leave and go to the bathroom and say, okay, I need to get a snack before we start, and I need to get some carrots and hummus to munch on while we're talking. It's okay to meet your needs, your physical needs. And taking deep breaths. I do this before I get a call on Fireside. I always take 2 deep breaths before I pick up the phone. Is a really great, simple grounding tool. Choosing an intention, even if it's quick. Be open, be curious, be spacious. And setting a time boundary. So thinking about your capacity to be holding space for someone who might be processing a lot of difficult things about a psychedelic trip or exciting things. It is a lot of energy sometimes to be listening to someone processing a psychedelic experience. And so checking in with yourself and just saying, like, how much capacity do I have right now? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it less? Do I have something that I need to tend to that if this stretches beyond, I might start to not be present? So I need to name that beforehand. And these are good to do up front, but you can also do them while someone is sharing if you're starting to feel yourself become unpresent because of time boundaries that you need to set. And this next slide, before I get to it, this is the meat of the talk. This is the slide about listening. And so in preparation for that, I also just want to offer another poem. And I love poetry. And I love how this poem, it's called How to Listen by James Pearson, sort of dovetails with the poem by Denise Levertov that I gave at the beginning. So James Pearson writes, "I'm not asking you to come down here and clean out the muddy corners of my life. I'm asking you to be a forest where mud and leaves, shadows and light, growth and decay all have their unquestioned belonging. I'm asking you to be an ocean where even great storms don't trouble the depths, and each tear is welcomed as a homecoming. I'm asking you to be as spacious as the vast darkness behind the sky, which will never be afraid of what I do or don't choose. I'm not asking you to hold me together. I'm asking you to open so wide there's room for all the ways I come apart." And that is what listening is all about. And when I say listening in the context of psychedelic peer support, or just peer support in general, I'm talking about active listening. And as active listeners, our role is to communicate to the people that we are listening to that all feelings are okay. That all parts of the person that are arising, maybe for the first time, are completely okay. And if we can do that, if we can communicate acceptance and compassion for these different emotions, then what we're doing is empowering the other person to do that for themselves. And our ability to communicate acceptance to a person is directly related to how well we can accept and feel within ourselves what that emotion that the person is feeling. And this is the hard part about peer support, right? Or active listening in general. So that's why active listening is not just a process of holding up a mirror to someone that you're listening to. It's also a mirror to ourselves. It's a process of doing our own inner work so that we can understand what emotions activate us. So some of the major tools of active listening, I've got a few slides that I'll go into more details here on some of these, but a really big one is reflective statements. And these reflective statements, it's not about you guessing correctly what a person is saying. It's more about letting the person know that you are listening attentively and compassionately. And the reflection can help the person clarify what they are feeling. So I remember when I first started doing psychedelic peer support, I had a lot of anxiety around reflective statements because I was like, what if I reflect back something that isn't true and it pisses the person off and they think that I'm not listening to them? And I just found that that is absolutely not the case. When you offer reflective statements like, "You sound really afraid right now," that allows the person to say, "Oh, I am really afraid right now." Or like, "Yes, you're right." Or like, "No, I don't actually feel really afraid. I just feel really nervous." You know, so it's this invitation to explore as well. Or something like, "I'm hearing so much sadness right now." It's just an offering. And typically when people hear that, it's like a, "Go on, tell me more." Or they latch onto that and elaborate more and explore that more within themselves. Or something like, "I can really hear how hurtful this experience was for you." Another key tool is sharing impact. So some of these, this is kind of a hodgepodge. This is a mix of things that I've learned at Fireside. This is also a mix of things that I learned at Seek Healing, and I attribute Seek Healing to this one in particular, which I love. And when we are listening to someone, it is not just one way, right? not just one person is being impacted. Both people are being affected in mind and body by this experience, this circle. So even when the focus of a conversation is on one person, both are impacted. And one thing that can be really powerful is just telling the person the impact of their sharing. Like, where I felt you the most was, or when you said X, I felt tingling in my body, or I felt my stomach clenching, or I felt my heart opening. You can base it in body feelings, you can base it in emotions, whatever is arising for you. But again, it's just this offering of like, I'm really listening to you and it's impacting me. And you don't need to say it in like a negative way. Like, impact can sometimes have this negative connotation. Like, you are just being affected by this person sharing. And so I love oftentimes to kind of pair reflective listening with impact statements as well. And then curiosity. So this is a whole other slide here. And this is not new. I did not make this up, honest, open questions. But this is from Parker Palmer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Parker Palmer. Yeah, mom's nodding. So this is a quote from Parker Palmer. He says, "An open question is one that expands rather than restricts your arena of exploration. One that does not push or even nudge you toward a particular way of framing the situation." So asking honest, open questions is a way to avoid identifying a solution for the other person. It's a way to avoid reacting, and it's a way to gain a deeper understanding of the situation and possible actions. It also values listening without judgment. So here are some qualities of honest, open questions. Unknown, unanticipated answers. Like, there's no agenda in the question. You don't know what you're going to get. So something like that is, what surprises you about this? Or what is moving you about this situation? They're brief and to the point. So there's not a lot of introduction to your question, something very simple and broad. What are your hopes? What are your expectations? And these questions allow a person to explore their concern rather than satisfy your curiosity. And this is one that I really struggle with, is like, sometimes I just really want to know something juicy and meaty about what someone's sharing. And when I feel that like hunger feeling coming up in my body, I know that it's not coming from a place of just exploring a concern. It's coming from a place of my curiosity. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing. It's just something to be aware of. So something like, what was the hardest aspect of this situation for you? Notice these are just really big and open. They allow the person to take the question in whatever direction, but they are just directive enough to focus someone. Asking about feelings as well as facts. One of my favorite ones is just to ask, what does feeling X mean to you? Because that's something that is very different for a lot of people. Like, what does feeling stuck mean to you? Or asking, like, have you ever had an experience similar to this? And then this idea of no yes, no, or right, wrong answers, that's a really good litmus test to whether you're asking an honest, open question. If there is a yes or a no, or a right or a wrong, it's not honest or open-ended. So how do you feel about the experience that you just described? Or where is that landing in your body right now? Do you feel anything happening in your body as you tell this story? And these questions often begin with what, when, where, who, or how. Oh, right. So consent. I put this in here because this is also something that Sikh healing taught me a lot about, is this idea of ongoing consent in conversations. And it can be something as simple as, like, I would like to offer reflection, is that okay? Or can I ask you a question? And to me, when I first heard this, I was like, that's overkill. That's so much to like continue to juggle in a conversation, is continuing to ask people questions. Ask people if you can ask a question. But what I've come to realize is that by doing that practice over and over again, it allows you to really be real. Like, some people don't want to be questioned. Some people just want to share. Some people don't want reflections. They just want to be in their experience. Maybe they're really activated, and being interrupted and reflected back is just not where they're at right now. And so it allows you to practice respecting agency and free will and dropping the autopilot. So particularly in our culture, apologize, my notes are all kinds of, here we go. Particularly in our culture, I think too, when we were all children, consent was sort of baked in to our childhoods as just not being on the table. We don't often ask kids what they want or what they want to do. We just grab them, we take them somewhere, right? And so I feel like consent starts very early, or the culture of non-consent starts very early in this society. And so it's kind of a relearning of how do we emphasize consent in conversation so we can practice saying no. Because I know for myself, saying no is really hard. And I oftentimes want to please people in conversations, even when I'm being listened to. And so really allowing myself to drop in and say, okay, do I actually want a question right now? No, I don't. I don't want to explore this right now. I just want to be able to talk about it. Has been really empowering.
I have a question on this part.
Yeah.
So the earlier slide was about asking questions and being interactive, but if you're helping somebody with their session, how do you know when they're not wanting to be disturbed? Do you just wait for them to ask and talk to you? And otherwise you stay
silent? So let me just be clear here. Like when I feel like I'm about to ask them or want to ask some questions, I'll say, hey, I'm wondering what you need right now. I would like to ask a question. Is that something that would feel supportive right now? Are you open to a question? Are you open to a reflection? Are you open to me sharing an impact right now? And so that's what I mean by it's constant and throughout the conversation of just always asking. Until I feel, for instance, that there's enough of a rapport where I've been asking them to ask a question, they say yes, yes, yes. And then I get the sense that, okay, we're in this space together where it's okay to explore. But it's really making sure that.
Because if they're deep in that section you just talked about, where they're in there and they don't want to be disturbed, they're just dealing with something and they're dealing with it. Like, how do you know not to disturb? Especially if they're like crying or something.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I understand your question now. There's just a sense, typically, I can't get a word in. That's how it happens. At least I'm remembering some conversations on the peer support line where I will try to talk and there's no room for me to talk. And so I'm like, okay, this person is really just needing to share and unload. And I'm just here to offer some empathetic yes, I hear you, and that's about it. Yeah. So it's rare that I ever talk to people on the phone who don't want reflections and questions, but when I do, it's pretty obvious in just the sense of their energy, how quickly they're talking, the lack of silence, the lack of breaks in the conversation. Is that helpful? Yeah. But if ever you're not sure, you can always ask.
Can I add to this?
Yeah.
When things are really sensitive, when somebody's crying in a potentially like open wound state,
Yeah.
I really like to exercise just listening and allowing the experience to just play its course.
Yeah.
Because I don't really think that my brain is the one to figure out where they should go to next in this like very sensitive space. And so I've veered towards listening and just holding that space and letting somebody know that I'm hearing them crying, and that's often more than enough, and they take it from there when they cool back down. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Like when you get people who are very acutely sensitive and just extremely tender, sort of offering like, I'm hearing that you're very sad. Might not be the right tone. Totally, yeah. So that, and thank you for that, because this is sort of the next part of this is tools that you can use when maybe, reflective statements, sharing impact or curiosity isn't the right move. Maybe it's just more about empathetic noises, your tone of voice. And this is a big one, silence. It's super uncomfortable for people. But I remember one caller a couple months ago who literally just wanted me to be on the phone with them while they went to sleep. That is all that they needed. We talked for a while, and I would just allow the pauses to happen. And sometimes we had a period of silence, like 5 or 10 minutes. And then at some point they popped in and they're like, I'm just gonna lay my head down. Would it be okay if you just stayed on the phone until I go to sleep? I said, yeah, absolutely, I'm here. And that was all they actually needed, was just the silence, but knowing that someone was on the other end of that silence. So this, in my experience of like, talking to my community at Fireside, people who are on shift, is always a really hard one, because it's hard to know how much is too silence, that it's uncomfortable for people. And usually that's a reflection of how uncomfortable it is for the person holding the silence too. It's an interesting dance, but it's great to practice with. And typically I find that silence doesn't hurt. It's not going to hurt someone to offer silence. It might be uncomfortable, but some really beautiful things can come out of allowing there to be space for people to sit with their thoughts and really hear them, and then share into the space and not be interrupted or directed or moved onto another thought. And then, no fixing. I have a little quote I like to share about fixing. So this is from Rachel Naomi Remen. She wrote a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. And I really like how she differentiates sort of helping, fixing, and serving. So these are 3 ways to see life. And when you help, you're seeing life as weak and you as strong, as something that someone needs to come and help the weak. When you see you need to fix, you're looking at life as broken. And again, you have that power to fix something that is broken. But when you serve, you see life as whole, as it is. And that's, to me, what psychedelic peer support is seeing someone as inherently whole, and whatever they're bringing to the table as inherently whole. So when we serve in that way, we understand that a person's suffering is also my suffering, is also your suffering, and that my joy is their joy, is your joy. And that impulse to serve can arise naturally, so that the natural wisdom and compassion presents itself. And I've really felt that in the psychedelic peer support space at Fireside. It's just when I am there and I feel like there's nothing to fix or help, it's just as it is, I'm surprised by what comes out of me. And a server knows that they're being used and has the willingness to be used in service of something greater. We may help or fix many things in our life, but when we serve, we are always in service of wholeness.
Can you say that again? When we serve?
When we serve, we are always in service of wholeness.
Who's the author of that?
Rachel Naomi Remen. It's called Kitchen Table Wisdom. Yeah. She's like a phenomenal, I think, psychiatrist or maybe just a doctor, but she has these short stories about serving her patients. It's a really beautiful book. And then this one, returning to the body. So this is not just for you, it's also for the person that you are serving. Again, this is kind of an invitation too. You always want to ask for consent. But offering people to move around or change their environment, particularly when they're feeling stuck or overwhelmed. Finding objects to hold, like heavy stones, can be helpful. And these are the two that I use the most with people who are feeling overwhelmed. Breathing techniques. We actually did a box breath yesterday in the community conversation group. But a box breath is just an even number of counts for an in-breath, so 4 counts, holding it at the top for 4, exhaling for 4, holding it at the bottom for 4. I always use that with people, and it really does shift things, if people are wanting to shift, that is. And then describing the room, I sort of touched on that with that example of the caller who was describing the floor that they were on. It's a great way to just return to senses, a sense other than shift the sense from whatever they're feeling or feeling overwhelmed by to bringing in the eyes or what a person is hearing or smelling. And this applies to you too, as someone holding space. Like if you are starting to feel your body stiffen or feeling disconnected from your body because you are intaking a lot of energy, move around. Ask if you can shift to a different room or the couch or standing in the kitchen. Take a moment to pause. Sometimes with people on the line, I say, whew, wow, this is some really heavy stuff, and I'm feeling a lot in my body right now, and I'm wondering if you would be open to just taking a few deep breaths with me. Sometimes they say no, and that's fine. So I have to do something for myself to release that. But I think being really honest in all the ways, when you're serving someone, especially, again, peer support, where we don't have this professional role that we're playing, to be as honest as you can be about where you are in terms of your impact, where you are in terms of your body, and taking care of yourself. Yeah, and this is also a really hard one for people to do, including myself. So setting boundaries. When we are supporting people who are processing psychedelic experiences, we have to be really honest about if there are things that they are bringing up that are actually really challenging for us to be present to. We all come into relationships and into rooms with our own set of experiences, our own set of activations. And if somebody went through a psychedelic experience where they are describing something that you have a major activation to, be honest about it. And you can be compassionate about it and say, whew, I am noticing that there's a lot of activation happening in my body, and I'm feeling like I can't be really present right now. And it's not you, it's my own, set of experiences coming into the room right now. And so taking space, setting the boundary that I'm not sure I'm the person who can support you with this right now. These are okay things to say, even though they're really hard to say. And then also sticking to your time boundary of ending the conversation at the time you said you would. So I really wanted to get into how to hold big emotions and this idea of like setting boundaries around comfort and discomfort. There's just not enough time today. I want to save some time for questions here, but that is something that enters the room a lot in psychedelic conversations. And checking in with yourself about how much you can hold and where you're willing to go is important. And oftentimes those tools of active listening, so reflecting, sharing impact, offering silence, are just so instrumental for holding those big, big emotions that can sometimes arise. Cool. So in closing, I don't really know what I was going to say, but I didn't prepare the slide. But some of my thoughts that have come up around this in the current psychedelic movement is how much we view the substance as the medicine, how much we view psilocybin or ketamine or MDMA or LSD as the thing that is going to heal us, heal the world. And just in my own experience with Fireside and my own community as well, is that it's the relationships that are the true medicine, and the community, and knowing that you can have people that you can come to and talk about these experiences. There are plenty of people who have major psychedelic experiences who have no one to talk to. And that might heal some people, but others are left being unable to process adequately and really integrate what they've learned. And I also just want to name that, like, in the indigenous perspective, these substances are not the medicine. It's the cosmology, it's the community, it's the relationship to the people, the land, the plants, the fungi, the animals. And so I think this is just like one small step towards reclaiming a more grounded, rooted, indigenous, right? As the indigenous peoples have always held these medicines, right? Is creating more communities of care and knowing how to support people in processing their psychedelic experiences. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
Two questions. One question is if you've ever had an experience with a caller where most of these practices just weren't working really, and like how you kind of navigated that. And then my other question is, what kind of qualifications do you have to be like a Fireside volunteer, and do they take you through like a training to become a volunteer?
Yes. So the caller that I actually mentioned was sort of the first time that all my tricks did not work. So they called back and said their partner was extremely angry with them, and they were just very dysregulated, understandably so, being on mushrooms, having a partner angry at them, like, oh, oof, oof. And I tried all the things. I tried allowing silence, allowing reflective statements, asking for if they wanted to do any sort of body scan, nothing. And what I had to realize when they decided that they wanted to end the call was that it wasn't me, and it wasn't that I wasn't doing a good job. It was just this person was in a place where they really needed comfort from their partner. And so that is hard. None of the things work because it holds up a mirror being like, am I good enough to do this? And really, you're talking to strangers on the phone. There's so much context that I am not privy to. I have no idea, but it does happen sometimes, and it's typically for people who are seeking something from a Fireside volunteer that a Fireside volunteer cannot give them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, so for Fireside, really the only thing that I'm aware that they're interested in is, do you have experience with psychedelics? And do you have kind of a compassionate, tender presence and interest in helping people? That's it. And then if the answer is yes to those and the interview goes well, they do a 30-hour training program. That's pretty extensive, including how to deal with suicidal callers, which is a big part of that. Yeah. Benj.
I heard a couple of times through this talk the differentiation between kind of a professional and a peer support. And to me, through this talk especially, but maybe just in my experience as well, I'm realizing the peer support might be better at some of these kind of interactions. And I'm wondering just if you could maybe expound upon the differences between the two types of support and what you've seen like work better in one situation or not in another.
Yeah, I mean, I can come at it from the perspective of like, I don't actually know what it's like to be as a professional in that role. I only have ideas around that. But I do know just anecdotally from what I've heard from the Fireside director who kind of compiles all of the data about Fireside, is that a lot of people call in saying, I would never talk to my therapist about this stuff. And there's a whole lot of reasons that that could be the case. It could be a personal relationship, it could be that their therapist does not have experience with psychedelics. Who knows what that actually means. But one of the, I think, main differences is the power dynamic that exists in therapeutic relationships that does not exist at Fireside. And I shouldn't say not exist, because there are callers who call in and who are like, you have the answer. And we're like, no, we don't. So there's a perceived power difference by some callers, but I think a lot of people who call in feel at ease because there is this equality. We are just there as peers, as friends. And so I find that people who, strangely enough, who are dealing with very touchy, like things that they've never spoken to before, are calling into Fireside to talk with someone. I've spoken to people who have unearthed things, very traumatic things in their psychedelic experiences, who have said, I've never told anyone this before. And where I think it works really well is the anonymity of it. And so that's a little bit different from offering peer support in communities that know one another, but I think that's where Fireside is really helpful, is not having as clear of a power dynamic, having that sense of equality, and then having that anonymity that people need. So I don't know if I can speak as much to other scenarios where I find that peer support might be more helpful. But I'm sure it's different for everyone too. Yeah.
Can I jump in as a professional, mental health professional? I can imagine that the difference might be, as a professional, when I'm working with a client, we contract at the beginning for goals and objectives that they're going to be working on over a set period of time. And so, yes, those can fluctuate and change. And there's documentation of the progress that we're making. So sometimes people don't want to talk about some of these things because they don't want it to be documented, or it's different than what they had come in and contracted for. And again, you can always change your goals. And I would imagine that the anonymity is profound, to be able to call somebody and just let it all out there, and not feel like there's somebody who's going to be accountable to you or hold you accountable to some step or objective that you've identified initially. That's my guess.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even think about that. Thank you. And I think too that it's free, and so there's, without goals or objectives that need to be met. The aspect of it being free as well helps people to not think that they need to get a certain extracted value out of the conversation. There's no expectation of something needing to be gained. And so because of that, I feel like a lot is gained. Yeah.
If people are a call-in not in crisis, but if they've had a really profound experience, they call just to kind of talk about it?
Yeah, for sure. I love those calls where they're just like brimming and need to share with someone. it doesn't happen as often for me personally. I've gotten a lot more sort of people in crisis or people really struggling, but it does happen.
And another follow-up on that. So do you, I know like setting is important, do you often find out where they are and where they're, like how they place themselves? And do you see like a trend with the placement and the settings of people who are in crisis versus the people who had a great experience and they're calling to share? Do you see like things that kind of stand out?
Interesting. I can't say that I've seen any patterns with that, in part because I typically only ask about a person's location if I sense that like safety might be an issue, or if I'm doing like a describe the room to me, which I don't do all the time. So I don't know. But I do get a lot of callers who are alone. They're not taking it in a group, there are not other people around them, or they are like cloistered in their bedroom in college, alone. So that's something I have noticed, is like people who are typically having a hard time are alone somewhere. I don't know exactly where, but.
Have you had to do a conversation with multiple people, like facilitating, like interacting with each other?
I have had a caller, and we do at Fireside, we also support people who are supporting people journeying.
Cool.
I've never gotten a call specifically for that, but I did get a call from this really cute pair of friends who one of them was planning to take mushrooms and the other was going to sit for them, and they were calling it just to be like, the mushrooms didn't work, like why not? And so we talked about that. And it was really cute. I was like, I'm so glad you guys are doing this together. Yeah.
For big emotions, when things get dicey, where could we go for training for that? Different class, different entity, Fireside, what have you, just so we can be equipped, because that stuff comes up.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, it's hard to it's hard to say, because I don't know exactly the content of other training programs. I mean,
Right.
Fireside is definitely equipped to do that, but they don't offer training outside of the volunteer program.
Okay.
But honestly, the Seek Healing program that I mentioned and the listening training that they offer has been incredible. They are paradigm shifting. They gather people in a listening training who are currently bonded to substances, people who are completely sober or have never had bondage issues. And I say bonding with substances instead of addiction, very specifically, just to clarify that. And so those spaces are really interesting because you get people, at least during my listening training, who came in, started listening training and said, I'm extremely suicidal today. And we hold the group, and there are people who are designated to deal with the big emotions or help someone move through the big emotions in breakout rooms. But as a group, you learn how to work through and hold, as a community, people who are experiencing these sometimes very taboo and scary emotions. And so I highly recommend them. They're extremely affordable and accessible intentionally. They're a community building organization, and they do all online trainings, which I found very valuable for working in the psychedelic space too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was called Seek.
Seek Healing.
Seek Healing.
Yeah, one word. They're based in Asheville. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
How can I contact Fireside?
If you just Google Fireside, you will see the website come up and the number. They also have an app that you can download because people who are actively tripping have a hard time dialing phone numbers. And so they've made an app so that you can just open it up on your phone and hit the call button. Yeah, and then, yes.
I was just wondering, I guess most of your talk was about like answering phone, but I wonder if you could address just the idea of like, I have a friend who wants to do mushrooms. It's like, and they don't really want to, hire a professional or whatever. It's like, how do you know if that's a good idea?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great big question for sure. Because it's how do you know if it's a good idea
For me.
for you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that there's a lot of things to consider there, just like your own experience with mushrooms in particular, your own experience with uncomfortable mushroom journeys. Because one of the things that can come up, I've heard from facilitators, is this issue with, oh, I've had a few mushroom journeys and now I'm going to start sitting for people. And then they start sitting for people and they realize that someone that they're sitting for is having an experience beyond what they've ever seen before, and it's shocking. And so I do think that that's important, is being really honest with yourself of, what have I experienced in psychedelics? Am I prepared to hold someone who's moving through maybe a very challenging or different kind of experience from what I've personally experienced? And just making sure that you also have a support network around you. Like, does this person have someone that they can talk to after the experience, multiple people that they can talk to after the experience, maybe a therapist? Making sure that you are not the only person that is supporting them, because that's a big responsibility. I am also open to opening it up if anybody has other thoughts on how to navigate that decision, but it feels really hard to do without understanding the context of your specific relationship and your specific experience. Yeah.
I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
I try not to facilitate for anybody like way beyond what I've explored myself, so some sort of grounding. But it's going to happen. Everybody's sensitivities are different, and so people are going to end up in spaces that may be deeper or more expansive than they've ever experienced or seen. Hang tight. You don't have to have any answers. Just breathe. Take care of their bio needs. Make sure that their physical body is okay, and be there to talk about it as they can find their way towards speaking. Everything will be all right, as long as they're hydrated and the space is safe. Just breathe through it. But if you're totally out of your bearing and you don't have any experience, say, with the said molecule, there's things like trip sitting trainings that you can do, and that can give you like a wide breadth of just vocabulary and things to pull from as you enter into experiences that may be new to you as well. So, yeah. Entities to look towards that would be like Zendo Project and things like that. So.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, Zendo Project, that's another great resource for training as well. Yeah, and I think just having some sense of like, if things do go, I don't want to say go south, but like if things do get really big, what are your supports too? And this is where Fireside is really cool, because it's just like people there to support people like you and your friend whenever things do get really big. So having that wider support network, I think, is important.
What did you say the name of that training program is? Zendo?
Zendo Project.
Zendo Project.
Yeah.
They offer some online training programs as well, so very accessible. Yeah. Cool, thank you. All right, any other questions?
One more.
Yeah, thank you.
Quick. How essential is sobriety in peer support, or have you heard of any sort of microdosing for a peer supporter?
Yeah, I haven't. This is something that is probably unique to what I'm trying to say is, like, if I think about being in my community and trying to support someone who is talking about their psychedelic experience, I think I could probably do it if I was microdosing on mushrooms. And it might actually help me access some things in myself a little bit better. So sobriety is, a loose term. I tend to find that alcohol is not something that is conducive to supporting someone. Use a term used loosely and based off of how you know yourself. But I wouldn't want to support someone, processing a psychedelic experience if I too am like very much in a mushroom experience or have taken a tab of LSD. That probably would not go well. So, does that answer your question? Yeah. Cool. All right, sweet. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.